let's get started. I want to welcome all of our speakers today. We have Jordan Matney, Super, Dave Quinn, and Dan Bowman. So I'll introduce Jordan and she's going to start, and then I'll introduce the others as we get to their presentations. We have Super Dave Quinn. I hope he explains the Super. I still haven't figured out why. That's cool. Super Dave Quinn is a seasoned certified economic development professional, author, podcast, host, and mindset coach delivering a wide range of consulting, training, and coaching services for economic development agencies, small businesses, and their executives. Dave is the founder and managing partner for Day One Experts, an on-demand economic development and small business consulting firm. In 2020, Dave founded the Texas EDC Connection to help businesses connect with community partners across the state of Texas and their economic development teams. He is on a mission to help reduce costs and stress for small business owners who decided to move or expand to the Lone Star State. Dave's career in economic development began as executive director of Levelland Economic Development Corporation, and he's held similar positions with the Frisco Economic Development Corporation in Bastrop, Texas. So Dave, come on up, welcome.
Every time we do Super Dave, I'll do that over at Topo Chico later. There is a story there. So, I was brought to the table to do something just a little different, so I hope I do it justice. So, buckle up, here we go. I first start with love. Do me a favor, I need everybody to stand up. I know y'all are like moaning and groaning, and I hate this, I know. But as an economic developer, to say stand up to a bunch of city managers, it's kind of awesome, right? Just saying. All right, turn to your neighbor and say, I love you. There's a question in the room. How many, if I ask this question, how many think that the world needs more love in it? Right? Say yes. Alright, here's the thing. Love doesn't just show up and just happen. You have to create it, right? Just like we did, the energy in the room instantly changes. You stand up, that's energy. You say I love you, here's the thing. You don't even have to believe it. You can turn to the person you don't know and say, I love you. Your body doesn't know the difference. It hears, I love you, and it says we must be in a safe place. And it emits a signal. This is all science-based, I promise you. Look it up. We have just changed the world, right? So always start with love. I can't express that enough. Always start with love. All right, here we go. By the way, this presentation is meant to be like a half-day, full-day workshop. I can do it in half a day, I can do it in a full day. I'm about to do it in 15 or 20 minutes, so buckle up. Here's my request to you. Don't try to take it all in. They'll get the presentation. Don't take notes. Look for a nugget. Listen, when you find a nugget, latch onto that. That's what you need. That's what you were here for, all right? There's going to be a bunch to it. Don't worry about it if you miss it. You can do the notes here, then you can call me and we can talk about it in more detail. Who am I? Who are we? You can see in the notes. It's Day One Experts. Here's who we are. Here's my partners. What you need to know on this slide is, this guy at the bottom, Farmers Insurance guy, said it best, right? We know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. And my partners and I promise we've done a lot of different things, and my presentation is titled, Size Doesn't Matter. It doesn't matter if you're 2,500 people in the city or if you're Frisco, Texas. Frisco didn't start as Frisco. They didn't start with a $22 million budget, I promise you. So don't let the numbers and the zeros get in your way. All right, first of all, we've got to shift your mindset, right? So we're in the business of change. Now, we don't hate change. Generally speaking, people don't like change. That's a proven thing, but you have to shift your mind because in communities, we are either growing or we're dying. We're never stagnant. We might feel like it, but if you're not growing, you're actually just dying really slowly. And you're changing, it just might be really small. So really, it's our job as elected officials and city management and economic developers to reframe that, shift the mindset around change, embrace it, right? Seek opportunities in the change. In every changing moment, it might not be pleasant and it might be very uncomfortable, but I guarantee you there's an opportunity there because I've been through it and I've seen it. The other thing is to be intentional with it, right? Change on purpose. Change is coming. The idea is, are we being intentional with it, right? So the other thing you need to know is it is constant, right? Change is constantly happening. We don't just stand still. So the idea is to create the change that you want. Dan just talked about all the things that's happening now, and that didn't happen by accident. They said, we want this. They put a flag in the ground and said, were willing to wait. They created the change they wanted, right? So you can do some things with your words. I'm a big believer in shifting your words to shift your mindset, especially when you're talking to your teams around the table. It starts there, right? Start using different words, right? Growth isn't scary. Everybody likes growth. As a human, we want to grow. That's change, just in a different form. Thrive, progress. Your city loves progress, right? Or thrive. They want to thrive. Those are good words. So when somebody says change in a meeting, reframe it. Subconsciously, it'll happen, and you begin to do it. You'll watch your team start to change the way they have conversations. And why that matters is because they're having conversations in the public. And it's so fun to find this. When you go and you give a presentation and you use these different words, and over time, somebody on the dais says a word, and you're like, that's my word. I did that, right? Like, they don't even know you did it. They start to adopt it. They start to talk like you. You can drive this. It's shifting your words. All right, so economic development, guys, we way overthink this. I'm just a country boy, pretty simple. It's really not that complicated. It's very simple. One, invest in infrastructure. Dan just talked about that. We had another example up here. Economic development begins with infrastructure. Now, you can build the greatest infrastructure in the world, but if you don't tell anybody about it, nobody's going to come get connected to it, right? So that's the second part. You got to make sure people know about your infrastructure. You got to tell them. That's marketing. That's getting the word out. Third is you got to help people connect to that, right? Okay, I know about it, but now how do I interact and get on that new subdivision that you just built, or that water line, or the power lines, or how do I connect with that? Dan and the economic development, they do a masterful job of taking what the city has invested in and going out to the market, telling the market about it, and then helping them connect and get the things they want. It's really that simple. I didn't say easy. It's simple, right? So don't get bogged down now. So what is infrastructure? A lot of times in cities we get talking about it and we think it's streets, water, sewer, the traditional utilities. That's what we think in infrastructure. But as you see, again, Dan with Alan, it goes beyond that. If you think about what a company needs to be successful in your community, whether it's a manufacturer, a retail person, data centers, you think about what they need. They need healthcare, education. What are the quality of life assets that you have in the infrastructure? Are you building those along with all the water lines and the sewer lines? The water and sewer is pretty easy, actually, right? Civil engineer will tell you exactly what it needs to be and how much it's going to cost. What gets really hard is we're trying to do, how do I solve the healthcare issue? How do I solve the workforce issue? Well, it's not just workforce, it's workforce housing. Well, it's not workforce housing, it's workforce, well, people got to love Allen and got to move there, and is it the right thing, and can they afford it? It gets much more complicated, but it's all in making sure you're understanding what is the infrastructure that our city needs and taking stock and looking at what do we have and what do we not have. When you start to do that, you start to understand where you need to go. All right, so let's talk about telling people about the infrastructure. You have to control the narrative because you have a story about your community, whether or not you created it. And I do this all the time. I have audiences pull out their phone and Google their communities. And if you're someone like Alan, you've got a lot of news stories, you're going to have some pretty good press. If you're a smaller community and there's not a lot of news stories about your community, it might not be great, right? I had a group up in Oklahoma when we talked about redoing their Wikipedia pages because the Wikipedia page that came up, the guy pulled it out and said, well, first thing's Wikipedia. That's awesome. Except a lot of the data was wrong and misinformation. Well, that all can be corrected, right? That all can be changed and corrected. But it is important for the city to get better at telling its story. One of the things I love about what Dan did in his slide was in 1992 they decided to do an economic impact study every year. Why in the world would every city in Texas not do that? Every year we fight for our lives in the legislature, every other year, thank goodness, to prove up the value of economic development and what we're investing in. Well, why would they know? We don't tell them, right? In Allen, they have data to fall back on that story. That's a little scary because you could study it and it could not be very good, right? So it's kind of an incentive to do good work, but it is important to craft your story and to take that to the market. And don't depend on the world to tell the story because everybody has a story to tell about your community. You want to drive that narrative. The other thing is leverage your fans. How many of you have people in your community that absolutely love your community? I can tell you who they are. They're the person at every ambassador ribbon cutting, right? every time you do any sort of community engagement thing, they're signing up first and, eating the donuts first, right? You know who they are. Instantly, you have people flash in your minds. You need to learn to leverage them. And what do I mean by that? Well, they have a social circle, and they are spreading the love of your community. What you want to do is make sure you're giving them the opportunity to spread the right stuff, and giving them information and connecting with them in a way that allows them to embrace that role and be your best fan. Because you can't do it alone as a city. You just can't spend enough money to do it, right? So you've got to find help, leverage your fans. The other is to find the right water cooler. If you're screaming in this direction, but everybody you want to bring is over here, you're at the wrong spot. So you got to spend some time and say, who do we want to be? What is it that we're missing? What is it that we need? Who is it that we connect with the best? Or that we make the most sense for? And everybody in every city, we welcome everybody. Everybody's welcome. That's true, they're all welcome. Let's be honest, not everybody wants to be in your city, right? There are certain groups and types of people, hunters, fishermen, people who love hiking, whatever it is. There's those people that are good for your community, and it resonates, that lifestyle resonates with them. So you have to understand, where are they spending their time, and then you can take your information and begin to put it into that place. There you go. All right. Next is help people connecting to the infrastructure. Now, this is generally, we talk about incentives. That's the easy one, right? Cash incentives. You just write a big fat check. That's all we do anyway. Right, Dan? Somebody calls you and you just write them a check and they come. It's awesome. It's really simple. Not exactly that way, right? But you have financial incentives. There can be non-cash incentives. But really, it's how does the city help people connect, right? Fast track permitting. I hear this all the time from developers, right? And I'm not saying developers are right, because they, 60 to bad, right? But if they feel like they're not getting connected or heard from, or if it's tough, then you have to figure out, how do we address that, right? And so, can you create fast track permitting for them? Can you get a dedicated project manager? I love this, especially in small towns, because people say, well, I only have one person that does permits. I'm like, perfect. Every grant you write has a dedicated permit person. That person is dedicated to do permits, right? But that sounds so much better on the RFI, that you have a dedicated permit person, right? Oh, it's a little cheap maybe, but I like it. Social and physical resources. So it's also not just about the business, right? You got to think, it's not a government entity connecting with a business entity to make a deal. It's human people in the city making a human connection with somebody at the business to make that work. Often, we used to go head to head when I worked at Frisco with folks, and a lot of times it came down to, where was the leadership team going to live? Where were they going to be comfortable? Or where were their workers going to be? That was more important than the dollars and cents, right? And so understanding, what is this social and physical resources that you can help that business? Because I can tell you, talking to business owners from all over the U.S. who are making the move to Texas, they are extremely worried, especially on the smaller side. So I deal with a lot of small businesses, 15, 20, 50 employees. It's the business owner. It's not a corporate guy making a logistics decision and just somebody go staff it up. It's, I'm picking my family up and the families of my 10 people, and we're moving to a state that we have never been to. Right? So it goes much, the incentives is like number 10 or 12 down on the list. In fact, one of the best examples was a young mom who owned a manufacturing company. And when I was asking her, okay, what is the information that I need to collect for you? What is your business driver? What's your business decision drivers going to be? And she said, well, I'm really looking for a community with a good Little League program. I said, I'm sorry, what? She's like, well, my husband likes to coach my son. He's really good at baseball. He's, 110, wants to play Little League. We want to make sure that the town has. That was the first one. Like, right out of the gate, she was worried about, where's my son going to play baseball? But I can guarantee you, there's not an RFI response in the state of Texas that had Little League programs on their top list. I guarantee it. But that is the kind of difference that you can make. If your community, don't get so caught up that you, in the business and what you can or can't do on the incentive side, that you miss you miss the part about the human side, right? It might not be about the dollars and cents. It doesn't have to be there. They had to have a building to go to. But their decision matrix was very different, right? So understanding that when you're talking to your companies and you're trying to get people to come to your communities, it's not always about the dollars and cents of the business side. So something to think about. So if you're a smaller community and you're thinking, well, I don't have the resources of the Dan or Bronzeville's or Frisco, I'll tell you that Frisco, again, didn't start there. Allen didn't start where they started. Their budget has grown over time. You have to start with what you have. Start where you are, right? And you can look, so often we look at our communities and we say, well, we don't have this, and we don't have that, and we don't have this, and we don't have that. And, well, I'm extremely depressed. Why would anybody come here, right? Take a different look at your community and start looking at why are people here? What is it that they love about it? And then start reminding them, because people forget. Because everybody in your community, they're used to seeing that too. And they're used to pointing out the bad things, right? So start reminding them of what you do have. Start looking at the assets you do have to work with. You know, it would be great if you're building a house if you had all the right tools, but if all you have is a hammer and nails, start with a hammer and nails, right? You can get it done. But as you get started, you can get more tools, right? So just get started and understand what you have and take stock in that. And that's back to where I say always start with love, right? People love their community, they just forget, right? They get caught up in all the bad stuff and how it's changing. And so you gotta remind them, hey, don't you love this place? You're not a tree, you're not planted, you can move. Why are you still here? 20 years later, 30 years later, you've been here. You've got to remind them. And having that conversation and starting from the place of reminding people why they love it, people will engage and do things for a community that they love that they wouldn't do if they don't love that community, right? So it all kind of ties together. There we go. All right, this is something else a lot of my clients get hung up on is, well, they want to build something. We don't have the money to build something, so we can't do anything because we can't build something. In 2011, I moved to Bastrop, Texas. And it was Labor Day weekend, and I moved the weekend before. So it was just me, my family hadn't moved yet. I went on a Monday, worked 5 days, and then I left for Labor Day weekend. That Sunday, the world caught on fire at Bastrop. It's the worst wildfire in Texas history. Something like 1,700 homes, 34,000 acres. It was a disaster. I didn't even know. I was there doing social media for them and putting out information on town. And I really thought the police and fire were giving me a hard time because they were saying, you know, it's Old Potato Road. And I'm like, that's not a real road. You're making that up, right? And they were saying all this stuff. But coming out of that, what I realized, we were seriously worried that we were the lost pines. And the joke was, we lost them all, right? Like, we lost the trees. And what's going to happen? Nobody's going to want to build here. Nobody's going to want to stay. They're just going to be gone. Why would they stay? It's moonscape. And a really cool thing started to happen because people started staying. And, you know, as an economic developer, I'm curious. So you're staying on it. That's awesome. So you're going to rebuild. Yeah. Why are you rebuilding? Just curious. You could take the insurance check and go anywhere. You're retired. You can live anywhere you want to. Why are you building back in this massive, desolated area? Well, Bob and Mary down the street, their kids live on us. They don't really want to go anywhere, so they're going to rebuild. They're not going to move, so we can't let them rebuild by themselves. I was kind of cool. And then it was, well, I really love the library, thing, and we're working on that. We're not done with that, and I don't want to leave them behind. I told them I would do something. And like, people were making decisions to stay in a place that really would have been easy to leave, but it's because they built a community around whatever it was. It was the library, it was the downtown association, it was the kennel, the dog pound, or whatever. I mean, it was all these different reasons why people were staying. And so a valuable lesson from that was, as a city, don't get so caught up in building buildings that you forget to build the community, right? Because it's the people in the buildings, using the buildings, that will save your community. Now, disaster's going to strike, or something's going to happen, economics are going to change, but if people are anchored because they have a community, they will stay, and they will fight for it, and they will make good change happen. So invest in community building activities, one of the things I love to do. And I tell the stories are really fun. It was a group of ladies that, it was a downtown business, and they had an afternoon book, once a week had an afternoon book. And I always showed up in broad stuff, right? It's a book club downtown with like 7 or 8 senior adults, ladies who love to read and stuff, and I would always go in and bring a little afternoon snack, and I was building a community, one little community at a time. I was giving them a reason to be there. I would always give them a little information, right? Like a little insider information, maybe just a little bit. And it's funny how that filtered out. Then I would go and there was a breakfast table. And they actually called it the liar's table. Because these guys, these groups of older men would show up and they would eat breakfast there every morning. And not all of them liked each other, but they wouldn't dare miss it because that's where all the gossip happened. And then they all had things. They would go eat lunch and they would go out and disperse throughout the day, but they didn't want to miss what just happened. They were briefing, local politics right there. So I began to show up and I would buy coffee and I would start just slipping stuff in. It's like, oh, this is what happened. This is really what happened. I know y'all didn't know that. If I gave them it in a whisper and I made it sound like I wasn't supposed to tell them, it's amazing how fast it would get back and spread throughout. They were worse than what most people think women gossip a lot. There was nothing like the old man at the liar's table of Bastrop, Texas, I can tell you that. So fan the flames of those passions, invest in those community activities, right? If somebody has a passion for your community and they want to do something, don't squash that. Even if all you can do is say, how about I buy lunch and invite 10 other people? Let's see, could you get 10 other people that are really passionate about this? Oh, I know, yes, Sue could come help me. She would do it. I'll say, how about this? I will buy you lunch next week. You get them together and let's start. I didn't do anything but buy lunch. For 10 people who are very passionate, right? Don't squash it. It might be the most far-fetched thing you've ever heard of. But if you squash it, then you lose it. You can fan it and direct it, right? So you build a fire, then you start to push them in the direction. That's not feasible, but what if you did this? And you get them to start moving, and then they're carrying the water for you when it comes time to do the bond election or you got to do this vote. Look, I know you want this, and we're going to pass them off to that library, but if you want it, we're going to need your help, right? And so you're getting them to do that work for you. That's how you can make that happen. All right, collaborate and succeed. Dan showed a perfect example of how their community in Allen does this, right? Working across with different things. And it can't just be city-centric, right? It's got to be the county, if you have a county, or if you have an emergency district, whatever it is, college district, medical district, whatever the different, it could be the man at the liar's table, right? It could be a non-political, non-official group that sways power, right? We all know there's some elected officials that are supposed to be in charge, and in some communities, those are the folks that are elected and on the dais, but they're not really in charge, right? So you got to understand the political landscape, and you've got to get everybody together, and you do that with a shared vision, right? If you can help them find the shared vision of where they're all going, it becomes really easy to get everybody to work together. Then you have to start working on trust. Are you investing in, are you doing things to start to build trust and engagement? How do you get them engaged? Not just showing up for the meeting, but having them take engaging in the process. Very important. You start with a shared vision. I always like this. One of the reasons Dan could say no to 4 developers was they know what they wanted, right? If you don't know what success looks like, if you don't know where you're going, it gets really hard to make decisions. And because you think, well, are we going to lose this? This is going to be the last time somebody's going to show up. Should we grab it? We better grab it. But if it's not the right deal, if it's not good for your community, because you don't know where because you know where you're going and it's not a good fit, then you can make that decision, right? So getting a shared vision and making sure that you know where you're going. We do this every day with Waze or with your vehicle, right? You go on vacation, you don't just show up at the airport and say, okay, I'll take the first flight you got. Right? Most people don't do that. I would do that, but my wife says I'm sort of dorky for that. But she's a planner, right? So she's got to map out the plan. You got to know everything. She's got to read Google reviews. She's got to do all the blogs on it. You got to know where you're going. You got to build trust, right? So a clearly defined strategy, right? If you just say, here's where we're going, but nobody has any idea of how we're actually supposed to get there, that's not going to go very far, right? So spending time to create a strategy to say, what is the vision? Now, how do we get there? It's first invest in this, then we're going to do this. We're going to build this first, then you're going to get this, and then once you get that, we'll pay for this, right? So it's a defined strategy. And then you have transparency and accountability, right? Here's what we did. Here's the results we had. Good or bad, that's what it is. And people would rather you do that and I always tell people, you do it wrong. If you own it and say, I did it wrong, but here's why what went wrong, here's what we're going to do better, usually goes a lot better for you than, I don't want to telling everybody what I did, so they don't know if I did it wrong or right, right? Like that doesn't bode well. And then true collaboration. Again, you've got to be willing to be the first one in. You're like, well, I'll do it if you do it. Well, that's not really true collaboration. Here's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to move forward with the understanding that you're coming and you're going to help. True collaboration. The other is engagement, right? So it can't just be all about you and what the city needs and what the city wants. If you want people to collaborate, you have to have some diverse initiatives that really gives everybody something they can. And it doesn't have to be all in phase one or whatever, but the plan they have to know where they fit in and what are they getting out of it. Community-wide representation, again, it's about making sure that you have the right people at the table. That doesn't mean you have 1,000 people show up at your planning meetings. Whenever I did strategic plans, one of the things that I do is I pick 15 of the most social people that you have, right? I want the person that's part of 10 different groups, whether it's a church group, they play bingo every Thursday night, plus they do Rotary, plus they do that. That's the person I want, right? I want the people to have multiple touch points in the community, and so that's how you get that community-wide representation without having to have 1,000 respondents on a random survey. And then documenting the ROI. Again, back to a great example from Alan of having that documented ROI. Right? When you build trust up over time, showing this is what we invested and this is how the next big ask you have, you've got some credibility to go to the market and say, hey, can we do this? And so that's really important as well. And with that, with this, questions? Is that good? Did I go too fast? I don't even know